Hey class, we're going to dive in and continue talking about generalized information of the human body. On this figure from your text, we have a figure from Atlas A of your textbook. A.3 is the name of the figure, and this just shows surface anatomy regions of the body. And we have larger regions and subregions. For instance, within the upper limb, we have a acromial, axillary, brachial, cubital, antebrachial, and that refers to the shoulder, armpit, upper arm, elbow, and forearm, respectively. When we look at cephalic, that refers to the head as a whole. Facial refers to the face. Cervical refers to the neck. When we look at thoracic, thoracic refers to the entire chest, but within that we have, within that entire chest area or thoracic region, we have the sternal area directly over the sternum, and then we have the pectoral areas over the pecs or pectoral muscles. The umbilical region or area refers to the navel or belly button. Abdominal refers to the entire abdominal pelvic area, the entire abdomen. Inguinal refers just off to the side where we have the groin, whereas pubic refers to the right in between the two inguinal areas. So the pubic area region goes right down the mid-sagittal plane. When we look at the inguinal, then we're going to have a left-right inguinal. And as we look at the genitalia, for males in particular that have very visible external genitalia, the penis refers to the shaft. The scrotum is the bag of tissue underneath the shaft of the penis, and then the two glands within the scrotum are referred to as the testes. When we look at the lower limb, our lower limb is going to be made up of the femoral region, aka the thigh. When we look at crural, that refers to the lower leg. Tarsal refers to the ankle, and then pedal is a blanket term or more of an umbrella term that refers to the foot. And within the foot, we have the dorsum, which is the superior or top of the foot, and then we have the plantar surface, which is the bottom or inferior portion of the foot. When we look at the back, I forgot a couple over here. We also have coxal. Coxal is more of a side area that refers to the lateral margins of the hips. Patellar refers to the kneecap. As we look at the back of the body, the posterior of the body, we have interscapular, which is going to be in between the scapula. Scapula refers to the scapula of the shoulders. Vertebral, I'm going to shift colors here, refers to the entire spinal column or vertebra. When we look at lumbar is going to be slightly off to the side, whereas sacral is going to be right in between the two lumbar regions. Gluteal refers to the buttocks, and within that we have the gluteal cleft, which is commonly referred to as the butt crack, and we have gluteal folds, which are the areas where the butt cheeks are going to overhang a little bit. On the posterior of the legs, we have the popliteal region, and this popliteal region is commonly referred to as the knee pit. The perineal region is not very well shown here. We would need a spread eagle view where the legs spread and zoomed in between the legs to really see the perineal region well. The perineal region is going to be in between the anus and the beginning of the scrotum in males. In female anatomy, the perineal region is an area of tissue between the anus and the vaginal opening. As we look at the heel is referred to as the calcaneal region. In terms of what you need to know on this slide, I want you to be familiar with this surface anatomy region. Traditionally, this has been covered in a laboratory setting where we would cover all of these surface anatomy terms in lab the first week of lab. This particular summer session we're working on this class, we don't have the ability to cover these surface anatomy terms in lab with our lab software, so we're covering them in lecture now. please familiarize yourself with these terminologies. For me in particular, what I found worked really well is I would draw, as a student, I would draw really beautiful looking human beings. Hey, I'm drawing with a keyboard. I'm drawing with a computer mouse right now. And then I should shift colors here. And then in a different color, I would draw and label those different surface anatomy terms, just so that I could get familiar and comfortable with those surface anatomy terms. So please take some time to draw some beautiful outlines of silhouettes of human beings, and then label these surface anatomy terms on them so that you're comfortable and familiar with them. As we look at the abdominal pelvic area, this can be broken up into 9 different regions. The umbilical region is our reference point, and that is going to be right around the belly button. And then we draw a tic-tac-toe board across the abdominal region. We have the epigastric region, epi meaning above, gastric meaning stomach. We have hypogastric beneath that, hypo meaning below, gastric meaning stomach. And then as we look over here, we have a left side and a right side. So I need to label this left and right. And this is something a lot of beginning A&P students get very mixed up on. And I, as somebody who's been teaching A&P for quite a while now, I still get mixed up on left and right. We need a patient-centered point of view. So as we're looking at this here, we have the left hypochondriac region right here. Here we have the right hypochondriac region. And let's break apart this word. Hypo is a root word that means below or beneath. Chond can refer to cartilage. So we have the cartilage of the ribs right here. So the hypochondriac region is directly beneath the cartilage of the ribs. And then as we look down here at the inguinal region, this inguinal region is going to be to the left and right of the hypogastric region. So here we have the left inguinal, here we have the right inguinal. And then here we have the lumbar region. This refers to the lower back. And in terms of landmarks that separate these two, the most inferior rib of the body is the landmark that separates the hypochondriac from the lumbar region. And then if you ever feel, people call it your hip bone. If you put your hands on your hip, you can feel a small little bump sticking out. That's called the anterior superior iliac spine, if you want to know the technical name of that bony structure. That is going to separate the lumbar region from the inguinal region. And then within these body regions, we have different organs that can be localized within specific regions. Some organs are going to travel through multiple regions. Some are going to be in just 2, some will be in just 1. We also have a lot of cavities in our body. As we look at these cavities that are within the human body, the cavities are going to have specific viscera associated with them. And these when we say viscera, that's a technical word that means organ. So within the cranial cavity, we have a brain. Within the vertebral cavity or vertebral canal, we have the spinal cord. Our thoracic cavity has the heart and lungs, and it can be broken into the pleural and pericardial cavities. When we think of abdominal pelvic cavities, the abdominal cavity is going to have most of our digestive organs. And then when we get to the pelvic cavity, which is more inferior, think of the anterior superior iliac spine as that dividing line, we're going to have organs that are primarily going to be associated with reproduction located in that area. And then we have membranes that line those cavities. We call them meninges if it's referring to the nervous system, or we call them pleura or peritoneal membranes if it's referring to the other cavities of the body. So let's look at those cavities in more detail. I'm going to shift to bright red here. Here in our thoracic cavity, which is a big cavity of the body, we can have within the thoracic cavity the pleural cavity on the right and left. that contains the lungs. We have the mediastinum cavity in between the pleural cavities, and the heart is within the mediastinum cavity. The pericardial cavity goes around most of the heart, and the pericardial cavity is a subcavity within the mediastinum cavity. A lot of students get mixed up on the diaphragm. The diaphragm is not a body cavity. The diaphragm is a muscle that separates the abdominal pelvic cavities from the thoracic cavity. And within the abdominal pelvic cavity, sometimes referred to as the peritoneal cavity, we have the abdominal region that is more superior, and then the pelvic cavity, which is more inferior. And then as we look at the cranial cavity and vertebral canal, cranial cavity is up here. It has the brain, and then the vertebral canal is the length of the spinal cord and contains the, well, spinal cord. As we look at those membranes that line the cavities, a serous membrane is always going to be a two-layered membrane. The parietal layer is always going to be towards the outside. The visceral layer is the inner or deeper layer, and it's always the visceral layers against the organ. Recall a technical word for organ is viscera. The visceral serosa is the serosal layer or serous layer against an organ. And when we think of the parietal serosa, that's the layer that's against the partition or wall of the cavity. So as we look at the lungs, for instance, the lungs have a double membrane around them. The parietal pleura is going to be towards the outside or superficial, and the visceral pleura is going to be more towards the inside or more deep. So parietal referring towards the outer wall, pleura for the lungs. Visceral for against the organ, pleura for lungs. So the parietal pleura is against the outside of the pleural cavity. The visceral pleura is towards the lungs within the pleural cavity. We could use the same terminology for the pericardial cavity. The parietal pericardium is towards the outside. The visceral pericardium is towards the inside. That's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.